Welcome everybody to ESTA's weekly lockdown, the penultimate one for our summer holiday, where we shall all be going to the Bahamas and drinking cocktails. Maybe, probably not, but still, we'll be grateful for just a little bit of downtime to refresh ourselves. We will be back in the autumn, don't worry. But we're extremely grateful this week to have Dan and Joe from Cardiff Violins join us, because I bet you've all got situations. Hi, boys. We've all got situations with your students where you haven't seen their instruments for months, and we're all slightly dreading what situations they're going to be in when you finally see them again. You know, will the bridge have come down? Will there be a soundpost at all? Or will it have been used for some kind of school activity, Blue Peter style work at home? But in fact, Dan and Joe, perhaps you could talk us through some of the basic things that parents might be able to do to the violins without having to bother the teacher, or without having to bother you at Cardiff Violins. What sort of things are fixable at home, do you think?
Right. Okay. I think there's some sort of general observations. Obviously, we see quite a lot of instruments that come through, and obviously we set up an awful lot of sort of educational instruments as well. We've got a couple of questions as well that we've been given from a couple of the teachers there. Should we come to those sort of at the end, or should we incorporate them?
Well, perhaps we could start with those questions. What were they? Right.
Okay. So, well, the first one was about sanitising instruments. Is probably the most appropriate sort of topic at the moment with COVID. I mean, Dan, do you want to give a bit of a...
Yeah. Okay. So. Well, the initial thing with sanitising instruments was we sort of have that issue ourselves, obviously being a shop and having customers coming in that want to try different instruments. We can have multiple customers coming in the same day. So we've got the challenge of how do we deal with that? And we have decided the safest thing to do is to quarantine the instruments and leave it 3 days between anyone playing the same instrument, because it's the only guaranteed way, with the complexity of cleaning an instrument, that you can be sure that, you know, it's COVID free effectively. With cleaning, you know, we kind of have to make sure that it's stated that there are risks. If you're going to be using an alcohol cleaner, or if you're going to be using any sort of, you know, bleach cleaner, anything like that, there's risks to the varnish. I mean, I've got an instrument here, so I can actually show, but sort of, you know, if you're cleaning the body of the instrument, there are risks that you might be taking the outer layers of varnish off. So if you are going to be using a cleaner, and generally this would be something that would be recommended on a cheaper sort of Chinese instrument, because the varnish is generally a bit more durable. But if you notice any residue on the cloth that you're cleaning with, or kitchen roll, anything that you're going to use cleaning, really you should stop cleaning if there's any sign of varnish coming off, because once the varnish is gone, it's a very expensive route to correct.
I will say, generally, with the cheaper sort of instruments, like the sort of Stentor class, the varnishes tend to be, it's not like a usual spirit varnish, which you have to be careful with, like on sort of a more expensive instrument. They tend to be sort of a hard lacquer finish over the top of them. So, I mean, it's hard to say, because obviously all Chinese instruments will, you know, and educational instruments will differ, and some will have sort of a softer varnish. But if you have got sort of a more brittle, sort of hard varnish, like lacquer over the top, you could possibly get away with sort of using sort of a sanitizing sort of wipe, or, you know, sort of a sanitized J cloth, obviously without too much moisture on, and then make sure that you sort of wipe any residual moisture off as well. But if any teacher are unsure, or parents are unsure, the best thing to do would be maybe to ask, you know, the local luthier or experts before attempting anything like that. And certainly on sort of higher value instruments, I would definitely err on the side of caution and stay away from the varnish. Really, I think if you're looking at sort of in the violin range, sort of, you know, a few £100, it's more likely that it will be sort of a harder varnish than sort of a more complex spirit varnish, which may sort of dissolve really. So,
but you're still basically fine to be doing alcohol wipes on strings and fingerboards and.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's the other issue that on cheaper instruments, the fingerboards and the chin rests can quite often be stained, so they're not actually ebony. They've got a stain on the outside. So if you're rubbing alcohol or a strong cleaner in them, you might find that your black fingerboard suddenly becomes white. And the same with the chin rest.
Very sure it is.
There's also risk that if you're rubbing sort of powerful alcohol into the side of the neck here, so the joint where the fingerboard is actually glued to the neck, alcohol is a way of actually separating the glue joints in a violin. So if you're regularly cleaning the neck with a powerful alcohol, you know, the fingerboard could fall off. There's a number of sort of compounded issues with high levels of exposure to alcohol with violins. So that's why we don't do it, because for our more valuable instruments, they're far more vulnerable to that. But even with the educational instruments, after being cleaned 50 times, I don't think it would look the same as it did before.
Yeah. Guys, I think that's the big worry. I can imagine an instance in a school where there's a double bass, so the pupils are using the same instrument, so it has to be wiped down several times a day. So maybe it's something that depending, as you say, on the value of the instrument, what steps they take, on whether in fact they look at alternatives and maybe having more than one instrument.
Yeah. I mean it's tricky. We would like to be able to just give you a straight answer when it comes to it, but unfortunately, because of the nature of violins and even with the cheaper instruments, if you go for like the very, very cheap instruments, then you can guarantee that the pegs, the fingerboard, and the chin rest won't be ebony. It'll be sort of a white wood underneath that is stained. But even like Dan said, even with sort of the best quality ones, like say like a Stentor Model 2, where they have used sort of ebony, they sometimes will, because it's not the finest quality ebony, you will have flecks of brown in it. They tend to stain the whole fingerboards just to homogenize the finish, which obviously, again, you know, for us with our instruments, when we shoot the fingerboards, we refinish them. So if there are flecks of brown, that's how they come, because that is, you know, that's the best feel for the hand as well. There's no resistance when you shift in. And also it means that you can get a proper finish then on the wood, and that you get a proper shoot along the length of the fingerboard. So I think if there's any doubt, ask an expert before sort of proceeding with that. Or you could always try and, you know, take a cleaning product on, say, the bottom of the chin rest on one side, and just clean a little bit. And if there's any black residue starting to come off at all, just stop. You know.
Or a cotton bud under the fingerboard, just to test to see if the cleaner is actually going to activate the varnish, and just check to see the color. If the color on the cotton bud is a sort of dark black, that's probably rosin and grime. If there's any hint of a sort of reddy, you know, yellowy, and any sort of violin pigment color of your instrument, then at that point you're at risk. So
I knew an old teacher that used to use lighter fluid to clean everything, and he was a smoker as well.
Oh my God.
I'm quite impressed he's still alive, to tell you the truth.
What other issues have you had come into the shop, guys?
We had another question here about sort of bridge curves, and about sort of struggling to play sort of on a violin the D and the A, or on a cello the G and the D, and basically sort of the bridge curve being too flat, and making it quite hard. Generally, with smaller instruments, you'll find you use a sort of a steeper, sort of a smaller radius curve on the bridge, which makes it easier for the kids to play. And obviously, when you size things down anyway, everything comes down incrementally. So a full-size bridge curve won't be the same as a quarter size. But I think this question was more directed at sort of whether or not you can do something at home to be able to remedy this. It's a bit of a difficult one because if you're dealing with an instrument which has come straight from China, it is hasn't been sort of set up in this country with a proper setup as we do. Just through cost saving, time saving sort of exercises over there, the setups are really quite sort of poor, really. So the string heights will tend to be very high, and usually what you find is if there is a curve on the bridge, it tends to be very shallow. It won't be the correct curve. If the string heights have come down because the string is sort of embedded into the bridge and it has been set up properly, you can either adjust one of the two, the outside strings. You never want to be touching sort of the inner strings. And if you take something like a small nut file, or we were discussing if people didn't have, say, a small nut file just to sort of take that string height down in the bridge, maybe using something like a cocktail stick with a bit of sandpaper wrapped around. It all depends on how confident someone is at sort of giving it a go. And again, there's lots of variables as well. Most people won't have a set of templates for string curves.
It's also probably important to mention that anything with wood is a one-way trip. So if you take wood away, you can't stick it back on. So if you lower the bridge and it's wrong, well then that's where you've got then. So that is an important lesson to know before going in. So approach tentatively, and any adjustment that you do make, check in small increments as opposed to taking going, I'll take 2 millimeters off and then thinking, oh wow, it's unplayable.
Yeah, guys, I've just got to ask, how you see it happen all the time where the student opens the case and they've been playing cricket with it or something, and the bridge has fallen over. What does the parent do? What's the easiest way? How would you advise the parent to put the thing back up?
Right, I'd say sort of the first thing to do is to remove any tension that's on the string. So basically loosen the tension on the strings right off. Then what I'd actually we'll use this one. It's a little bit cheaper than the other one, so so I'll give you a representation here. So I'd loosen the strings off here, and then the bridge comes down like this. I would be careful. I definitely put something underneath the tailpiece, like a bit of cloth or something, just to protect the adjusters from scratching the belly of the instrument. I'm just seeing if we've got. Here we go. That's probably better. Here's some tissues. But I'd put something like this underneath the tailpiece, just to protect those as a starting point, like that. And then when you've got all the tension off, I'd get your bridge.
Would you be checking for the sound post first?
Well, this is the other thing. When the tension is off the instrument, you are at risk of the sound post falling down. So you want to try and keep it as horizontal as much as possible, rather than sort of tipping it up, basically.
Also worth mentioning, it's worth avoiding applying pressure to the sides of the ribs at the point of the sound post, because if you squeeze the instrument, a properly fitted sound post should fall over with the compression of the ribs. So it's best when you're handling it not to squeeze at all. I will say with some instruments that have come straight from China, where they put the sound post up before, they're usually wedged in there with some serious pressure. So in that case, you might not. It might not move anyway, but you're not going to have the best sound as well by having it sort of jammed right in there. But yeah, try and keep it as horizontal as much as possible, and then sort of get your bridge. Sometimes you can use a little bit of chalk on the feet,
So
Perhaps you could just tilt your computer screen forward a tiny bit so that we can see this violin really clearly.
hang on, shall I come forward here?
That'd be super. Thank you.
Right.
I want to get every detail here.
So basically, first of all, with the bridge feet, you want to apply some chalk to the bottom side, because some people seem to think that the bridges are actually glued to the instruments, which is quite worrying sometimes. But it is just held in with pressure, and the chalk just gives a little bit more friction on the body of the instrument, just to hold it in place. The other thing that's always good practice to do as well is to have some dry soap at hand, or a bit of graphite, like a bit of pencil, and just to sort of just put it in the grooves. So you can rub a bit of soap in the grooves like this, and that's just to eliminate friction when you're putting the strings back on over the top. Then
this is a bit I'd like to see. Can you just tilt the computer screen down?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
If you, well, when you stand closer to...
Oh, that's good.
That's lovely, thank you.
Go. Right, okay. So basically you want to get the strings roughly in the grooves like that, with all the tension off, so you can move the bridge around, you can lift it up and down quite easily like that. And then basically...
How can you make sure it's the right way round?
Oh,
what do I need to look for?
So basically, if the bridge is being fitted properly, there should be a 90-degree angle to the back of the bridge. So you should see it should be leaning slightly backwards this direction, rather than sort of leaning forwards like that, with the feet firmly on the belly, that is. And also the other indication as well is the fact that the bridge will be shorter on the E side, on the treble side, rather than the bass side. This is because with string heights, when you're setting the string heights above on the fingerboard, when you're setting up an instrument, because of the flabbiness of the G by comparison to the E, the G will always have to be higher than the E, and that's obviously with smaller instruments, the string heights will come down compared to say a full size instrument, but always that ratio where the G is always higher than the E, that will always remain basically. So you can have a visual observation on the bridge. Sometimes the other cue as well is if it's been stamped, usually the stamp will be on the front side. So if you can see sort of on the front there.
Although confusingly with the bridge company stamp, that's normally on the back of the bridge.
Yeah, so that doesn't always follow true, but you can usually sort of gauge.
We're looking for that bend backwards though towards the tailpiece.
Bend backwards, and also the variation in the string heights. And again, I will stress this is providing that it's been properly set up as well, and it hasn't just sort of come with the basic Chinese bridge that's on. So once you've got that, then basically the necks which are on the F-hole, which are these little necks either side on the F-hole here. So basically, the inner neck on a violin or a cello should line up with the center of the bridge, basically. So it should pass through. This is pretty uniform for a lot of Chinese instruments because they're just done on a template, so they tend to be there or thereabouts. With older instruments, you do get variations, and the ratio between sort of the neck length and the stop length, which is to the center of the bridge, may vary. So if the teachers are maybe looking at their own instruments and seeing the bridge is maybe forward of the necks, or tends to be forward, you never really see them sort of be behind the necks, but you do get variations. Not to worry, this may have been set up by the luthier, and it's all based on ratios. But generally, with student instruments, aim for the necks with the centre of the bridge. So you've got the side observation just to make sure that the bridge is lined up. So you want to get it roughly sitting correctly. You can also do sort of an observation from the front on, and you can use the end of the fingerboard as a guide to see the straightness as well. And you can also sight down the fingerboard and check that the bridge is not too far either side, and you want it to be sort of central down the fingerboard. So when you've got it roughly in place, I'll say roughly because there is slight movement when you start putting tension back on, and you might need to do a little bit of adjustment after, but you want to get it roughly in place. So once it's there, you can start applying a bit more tension.
It's also worth checking at this point, whilst you're applying tension, as Joe's doing now, as you start to put tension on one string, the bridge may lean forward a little.
Yeah.
So it's worth just pulling it back a tiny bit, putting it back to 0, then moving on to the next string, and keep checking that as you're putting the tension on each string, just to make sure that otherwise the bridge will end up leaping forward as it's sort of 45-degree angle, leaning towards the scroll.
And it's also dangerous as well if the bridge is leaning forward and snaps forward under tension. If the adjusters have got if they've been wound in, so the bottom part of the adjuster is sitting quite proud underneath the tailpiece, the tension can sometimes cause cracks when it shatters down on the top of the belly, and it's quite a common thing to see cracks sort of running sort of along this section of the instrument underneath the tailpiece where the tailpiece has sort of come down on the belly. So definitely important to have something underneath protecting like that as well. But yeah, as Dan said, lots of checks as you're adjusting, because it will pull it forward. So if I just do up the G here.
It's the bits I hate. I hate winding.
It's the E string that gets me. It's it's like.
Sorry, well,
this is hundreds of miles away from you.
What's that? Sorry.
I said it's making me nervous, and I'm hundreds of miles away from you.
Oh, it's all good. These are something like dominant strings. A good synthetic chord string. The tolerances and the tensions will be a lot more forgiving than say if you've got like the strings that come with the instruments usually from China. They tend to be sort of metal core strings, and they tend to be much higher tension, and the tolerances are much finer, and that's when you can sort of easily snap a string under tension. But with these strings anyway, and I will add, this is a small viola, so it's
there's no E string.
There's no E string anyway, so it's
You can all relax. Thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. How has business been generally in the shop? Things picking up? People starting to bring in their instruments and saying help.
Yeah, Dan's been been in over the past couple of weeks, haven't you? So
yeah, things have definitely been picking up. It's been quite, it's a slow process, but we're getting to the stage now where we're returning to a semblance of normality. So that's
and normal opening hours for Cardiff Violins, is it?
Yeah, Tuesday to Saturday 9 till 5. So
doing a lot more sort of sending out instruments to people rather than sort of people come to the shop. It's started to pick up. People have been coming. Obviously, things have opened up a little bit later here in Wales anyway than the rest of the UK. So,
but it's quite wonderful, actually, isn't it? The way you can post a violin. I thank you very much for posting a student of mine violin that they bought the other day, and in fact, it comes in a rather remarkable box. I don't suppose you have one of those there, do you? Those inflatable.
The Amati boxes. I'll go and see if we've got one.
It's quite amazing. This thing, literally came through the post, not actually through the letterbox, but it's incredible actually what you can send out and not have to actually come into the shop and still have a good experience being able to compare instruments. And I was very impressed with your service, I have to say.
Basically, it's you've got like this. It's like a clear film on both sides, and then it's supported then in a rigid box structure then, and basically the violin sits on the one film like that, and then you put the top section of the box over with the film on top, and it holds it in suspension inside the box, so it's firmly in place, but it's not actually touching sort of the outer structure of the box, and it's just suspended by itself. And it's we've never had any problems. Loads of people are using them, these days. So to send instruments. So it's yeah.
And are you doing bow rehairs by post as well?
Yes, still doing those. We've always sort of done sort of quite a lot of postal bow rehair service anyway. You know, so it's that's continued. So that's good.
Is that packaging just for violins, violas, or does that extend to cello and bass?
It's just for sort of violins and I think violas as well. I think but they haven't got anything quite like that for cellos. It's a bit trickier when you get the larger instruments then, because just to make sure everything is sort of safe, there's more weight involved, and it's it's a little bit more of a tricky one to deal with.
Yeah, a bit more of a handling risk as well for whoever's delivering it, because obviously it's a much larger box to carry, so the risks are a bit higher with dropping, and there's, like you say, a lot more weight.
Yeah. But just at the moment, just on the violins and violas for those boxes.
What's the most common fault you're finding? You know, the recurring problem that you've been presented with the sort of student violin.
I'd say pegs are always the main issue. Tuning, as you probably both know, it's a real sort of pain, especially with sort of the Chinese student instruments that haven't been set up properly, and maybe the pegs haven't been sort of fitted correctly.
Anything a parent can do about sort of ridiculously stiff pegs?
Yeah, so basically with stiff pegs, you can always loosen the tension off. It's a good idea to get an idea of the fit. It's something that that teachers and parents can do at home. If you've got some dry soap, so like a little bit of dry soap, you can rub it around the peg end like this, all the way around. And if it's really dry and it hasn't got any soap or peg paste on, I mean, this would make a big difference to sort of a peg that's clicking and very, very dry. So just putting a bit of soap on like that and then turning it in the peg hole, you might find that sort of eases things up just by itself. When it comes to sort of getting a correct fit, when we're actually fitting pegs, you want to make sure that the fit is correct on either side of the peg box, so there's equal pressure on both sides. Usually what we find with Chinese instruments is that you usually get it fitting either on one side or the other. So when they come in, it'll be very light pressure, maybe say on the outside peg, but it'll be fitting a lot on the inside, which is quite dangerous because it puts a lot of force on the peg box on the one side. Because if you think, all that tension, if it's fitting on both sides, it's being distributed across both sides of the peg box. Whereas if it's just fitting on the one side, you're just going to put all that pressure to keep the string in place just on the one side. And this is where you can, potentially get cracks, especially on if you've got the D string or the A string on a violin, D string on a cello or viola. You can get runoff cracks. The light's not the best in here, but you can get runoff cracks, which is the distance between sort of the top of the peg box and the sides here.
Yeah,
there you go. So basically, the underside of the peg box, the distance is very close to the peg, so you can actually get cracks running off up here quite easily. Yeah. It's a very common sort of restoration sort of fault that we have to resolve anyway with a lot of older instruments. You see it, but you also see it on sort of kids' instruments as well, where the pegs haven't properly been fitted.
As a temporary easy fix for parents, a little bit of dried soap.
A little bit of dried soap, work that in there. You might need to do that a couple of times, and then also get a bit of either a bit of plasticine or a bit of peg paste, and then just like this, and then you just apply it round the two sections of pegs. Usually on a peg, you'll be able to see where it's touching, so it usually leaves a mark where it's fitting inside the peg box walls. So you apply the peg paste, a little bit on each.
Also worth mentioning that paste is a good solution if you've got slipping pegs, the opposite problem of a jammed peg.
Yeah.
And you can kind of balance the use of soap, dry soap, and peg paste to get the feel just right. If you put too much soap, they're likely to slip. Too much paste, it's going to be very hard to turn the peg at all. So, use both and get a feel for how it feels afterwards. If it's too difficult to tune without the string on, it's going to be even harder to do when you've got a string on there. So, apply soap and paste in ratios as you need. And
so it's a little bit like the Drink Me and Eat Me from Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? You keep sort of...
Exactly,
yeah. Thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic to hear from you, Dan and Joe. I'm sure if you, people could email you at Cardiff Violins if they have problems, issues, some help needed.
If there's any queries or anything, just drop us a line and we'll do our best to answer them as thoroughly as we can anyway. Phil,
next week is our last webinar before the summer holidays, and who do we have joining us?
It is. Well, next week we've got the ESTA team. So that's your good self, Nicole, I hope. We'll have the lovely Sheila, minus her trombone, but you never know. Steve Bingham, and Achin Gupta, who many of you will not have met, but he's the chap that does a lot of the digital marketing behind the scenes for us. And he'll be joining us from Delhi.
Fantastic.
And finally, but just as importantly, Ingrid Perrin, who is our new regional officer, running the regional officer program.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dan and Joe, again once more for joining us. It's been fascinating as always, and slightly nerve-wracking to watch you do those E-strings, but there you go. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.